I was 12 years old the first time my parents told me to man up and find my own ride. And even though years have passed since that cold morning, the memory sits in my chest like a knot that will never fully loosen. Childhood is supposed to be soft, warm, full of guidance and hands that hold you through the uncertainties of the world. Mine wasn't. Mine felt more like walking barefoot over gravel, manageable at first, until one day you realize you've gotten used to the pain. It was early winter, the kind where the morning sky looks bleached and the air stings your lungs. My school had organized a small inter-school competition: speech, debate, recitation. I had volunteered for the speech category. For weeks, I practiced my lines standing in front of the bathroom mirror, pretending my reflection was a crowd waiting to be impressed. I memorized every word, every pause, every breath. I rearranged my hair a dozen times, trying to look confident even though something inside me always trembled. Maybe that's why I wanted my parents there. Not because I needed praise, I knew from experience it might never come, but because some part of me believed that if they saw me trying, they might finally see me. The child behind the chores, behind the expectations, behind the quietness they mistook for obedience. The morning of the competition, my house felt like a storm cloud. I could hear my parents arguing from the moment I opened my eyes. Their voices leaked into my dreams so often that sometimes I couldn't tell if I was awake or asleep. When I stepped out of my room, backpack on my shoulder and hope in my chest, the argument stopped. Not because of me, but because they had grown tired of yelling. My mother stood by the sink, scrubbing a plate so aggressively I thought it might snap. My father was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone, jaw clenched, thumb moving in rigid swipes. Neither looked at me. Neither acknowledged the buzz of my excitement. I tried to speak gently, as if softness could soften the atmosphere. "I'm ready," I said. "Can we go now?" "It starts at 10. My father didn't look up, not even slightly. "You're 12, he said, voice flat. "You should be able to find your own way. Man up." The words froze me mid-breath. My mother finally turned, eyes clipped with irritation as if my existence itself were interrupting her day. "We're busy," she added. "Figure it out." Just like that. No discussion. No consideración. No ride. They returned to their tasks, their shoulders closing inwards as though they were shielding themselves from the inconvenience of parenting. For a few moments, I just stood there, the silence ringing louder than their earlier fight. Then I turned around and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't want them to see the way my eyes burned. I didn't want to give them something else to dismiss. Outside, the air was sharp, biting, almost metallic. I pulled my jacket closer and stared at the empty street. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know which bus went to my school. My parents had always dropped me off, not out of affection but routine. I didn't understand routes or numbers or bus fare. The world suddenly felt enormous, and I felt so small. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, hoping the right solution would fall from the sky. My breath formed small white clouds as I exhaled, each one carrying a piece of my fading courage. That's when I heard the scraping sound. Old Mr. Rahim from next door was shoveling snow off his driveway, slow, deliberate motions that matched the rhythm of his old bones. He paused when he saw me. "Where are you going alone this early?" he asked, leaning on his shovel. I swallowed hard. "School. There's a competition today." His eyes softened the way adults' eyes should when looking at a child. "Your parents not taking you?" I hesitated. "They're busy." The word felt heavy because it wasn't true. They weren't busy, they were indifferent. He exhaled, a long, tired sound that came from somewhere deeper than his lungs. Then he nodded toward his car. "Gulme, I'll drop you." I nodded, unable to speak. His car smelled faintly of mint and old leather, and for the first time that morning I felt like I could breathe. He didn't ask me any more questions. He didn't make it awkward. He just drove with the radio, playing soft classical notes, the kind that feels like a blanket when your heart is raw. Before I stepped out, he placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't let anyone make you feel small for needing help." His voice had the weight of someone who had lived a long time and seen too much. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to tell him that I didn't feel small. I felt invisible. But I simply nodded, thanked him, and rushed inside the school. The auditorium buzzed with energy. Teachers moving around with clipboards, students practicing lines under their breath, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. I felt nervous, but hopeful. Maybe today would finally be different. When it was my turn, I walked onto the stage, the lights warm on my face. I began speaking. My voice shook at first, but then it found steadiness like stepping from a wobbling stone onto solid ground. Every word felt like a thread pulling me towards something new. Confidence, pride, validation. When I finished, the applause echoed through the room. My teacher hugged me. A few classmates slapped my back. I scanned the audience instinctively. There in the middle row was the seat I had imagined them sitting in. It stayed empty. When my name was announced for second place, I smiled. But a part of me cracked quietly inside, like ice beneath pressure. After school, Mr. Rahim drove me home again. I try not to let disappointment show on my face. Inside, my parents were casually watching TV. I got second place, I said, voice small. My father didn't glance away from the screen. Should have tried harder for first. My mother didn't look up either. Good, she said absently. Go change. That was it. No smile, no hug, no pride, no worms, just indifference. That night, sitting on the edge of my bed, I held my certificate tightly, as if trying to squeeze meaning out of the thin paper. It meant everything to me, but nothing to them. That was the day something shifted permanently. Not instantly, not fiercely, quietly. Like a door inside me that had once been opened slowly, starting to close. Like my heart learning to retract before it could be heard again. As I got older, their words followed me everywhere. Whenever I cried, man up. Whenever I asked for help, man up. Whenever I felt overwhelmed or afraid, man up. Those two words taught me to swallow everything, hide everything, push everything down. They taught me that pain should be buried, tears should be silenced, vulnerability should be suffocated. At 15, I joined a science workshop after school. It ended late. Rain poured outside like the sky was unraveling. I called home. Can someone pick me up? I asked. Man up, my father said. Walk. So I walked home for 40 minutes, drenched to the bone, shivering so hard my teeth clicked. When I got home, no one even looked up. I stood dripping in the doorway like I was ice melting into their floor, invisible again. At 16, I was shoved by older boys near a market. They laughed as my backpack tore and my books spilled on a wet pavement. I ran home, chest heaving, knees scraped, hands shaking. I told my mother. She didn't get up from the couch. Man up, she said. Stop reacting to every little thing. At 17, I wanted to apply for a scholarship. The forms were complicated. I needed guidance. I knocked on my parents' door. What now? My father said irritably. I need help filling this. You're nearly an adult, he said. Man up and figure it out. I stayed awake until 3 a.m., reading instructions over and over, rubbing my burning eyes, drinking water just to stay conscious. When I finally submitted the form, I felt proud. Not because I did alone, but because I survived the loneliness. But surviving isn't the same as living. I didn't know that then. I carried their words like heavy stones in a backpack I was never allowed to take off. I became emotionally quiet, careful, reserved. I became self-reliant not out of strength, but out of necessity. I avoided asking for rides, help, time, attention, anything. I moved through life silently, as if apologizing for existing. Still, as years passed, something stubborn inside me refused to die. A piece of me wanted to break the cycle. A piece of me wanted to believe that one day someone would care enough to show up for me the way I wish my parents had. That piece kept me going. I got a part-time job fixing phones and electronics. I found ways to occupy my evenings so I wouldn't sit alone in my room thinking about all the things I didn't have. Life wasn't easy, but it wasn't unbearable either. I kept moving forward because that was the only direction life allowed. Then came the day when everything came full circle, when the past and present collided so sharply that I finally understood what healing actually meant. It was a few weeks after my 23rd birthday. I had just finished a 12-hour shift, hands aching from tiny screws and stubborn circuits. I was closing the shop when my phone rang. My mother. I froze. Her calls were rare, usually only when something needed to be done. I answered hesitantly. Hello. Her voice was thin, cracked, trembling in a way I had never heard before. It's your father, she said. He collapsed. They took him to the hospital. I don't know what to do. For a moment, an entire childhood replayed in my head. Cold mornings, long walks in the rain, empty auditoriums, torn backpacks, late-night scholarship forms. But I pushed it aside. I said quietly, I'm coming. And I ran. The hospital was bright in a harsh way. White lights, cold tiles, people moving with urgency. My mother sat on a bench, shaking. Her eyes were red, her hands cold when I touched them. I didn't know who else to call, she whispered. The irony stung, but I sat beside her anyway. Hours passed while the machines beeped behind closed doors. Every time a doctor walked by, my heart clenched. My mother cried on and off. I stayed there, steady, silent. At dawn, the doctor finally told us he was stable. Relief hit my mother so strongly she nearly collapsed. I held her by the shoulders. We walked into the room. My father looked pale, eyes half open, breathing slow but steady. When he saw me, something flickered in his face, surprise, shame, something else I couldn't quite name. I knew you'd come, he said weakly. His words cracked something inside me. Not in a painful way, but in a revealing one. I realized something in that moment. Love doesn't erase wounds, but sometimes wounds teach you how to love differently. I stepped closer, the noise of my childhood echoing behind my ribs, and prepared to say the words I had carried for more than a decade. I stood beside my father's bed, the quiet hum of the hospital monitors filling the silence between us. My mother hovered near the window, wiping her eyes, glancing at me as though she wasn't sure if she should stay or step out. Maybe for the first time, she sensed a distance between us that she hadn't noticed growing over the years. Maybe she finally realized that I had learned to stand alone, not out of strength but out of necessity. My father's breathing was shallow. His hand trembled slightly where it rested on the blanket. I had seen him angry, loud, stubborn, dismissive, but never this fragile. Human. Just a man, stripped of authority and ego by one moment of weakness. He looked at me like he wanted to say 100 things at once, but didn't know how. Maybe he never knew how. I took a slow breath. For a moment, I wasn't 23. I was 12 again, standing by the door, holding my backpack, waiting quietly for a ride I never got. I was 15, walking home drenched in rain. 16, bleeding from scraped knees. 17, hunched over scholarship forms that blurred under tired eyes. I was every version of myself that had been forced to grow up too soon. And yet, standing there now, I didn't feel hatred, just clarity. I said, voice steady but soft. When I was 12, I had a competition at school. I practiced for weeks. I asked you both to take me. My father's eyes flickered. My mother turned, her expression tightening. You told me to man up, I continued, and find my own ride. My father swallowed, guilt clouding his face. I remember walking outside. I said, I didn't know which bus to take. I was scared, but I didn't say anything because I thought maybe you were right. Maybe needing help made me weak. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Mr. Rahim took me, I said, a faint sad smile touching my lips. He showed me more kindness in 10 minutes than I'd felt in years. My mother covered her mouth with her hand as if trying to hold back a sob. My father closed his eyes. I won second place that day, I said. My teacher hugged me. My friends clapped. And I looked at the empty seat where you should have been. A tear slid down my mother's cheek. My father's jaw tightened as he stared at the ceiling, as if unable to face me. I'm not telling you this to blame you, I added, breathing slowly. I'm telling you because it shaped me. My voice softened. It shaped me in ways you never noticed. The room fell quiet again. A nurse walked past the door, the faint squeak of her shoes echoing like punctuation in the silence. My father finally spoke, voice raspy. I didn't know how to be a father, he said. I thought making you tough would protect you. Toughness isn't silence, I replied gently. Toughness isn't walking alone when you're scared. It isn't hiding pain or pretending you don't need anyone. He looked at me then, really looked at me. Maybe for the first time. Maybe he finally saw the child he had overlooked, the teenager he had dismissed, the adult he hadn't expected to grow into something separate, something independent. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words came out small, fragile, like they had aged inside him for years before finally being freed. My mother stepped closer. We didn't realize," she said, voice shaking. "I was stressed. Your father was stressed. Life." I held up my hand gently. "I know, and I forgive you." My father stared at me like forgiveness was the last thing he expected. But I continued softly, "I won't carry everything alone anymore. I won't be the child who swallows everything silently. Not anymore." My mother nodded slowly, tears dropping onto her hands. I sat down beside my father's bed, the chair cold under me. I leaned forward and placed my hand over his. It felt strange, like touching a memory, but also felt necessary. "You get a chance now," I said, "to learn, to change, to try again." He nodded weakly, eyes glistening. A few minutes later, he drifted to sleep, his breathing easing into a gentle rhythm. I watched him, my thoughts mixing like colors in water. I felt sadness, yes, but also something like compassion, a softness I had never allowed myself to feel toward him. My mother sat next to me, clasping her hands together. "You grew up so fast," she murmured. "Too fast." I didn't respond. Some truths don't need answers. After a while, I stood up. My mother looked up at me, frightened. "You're not leaving for good, are you?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm just going home to rest. I'll be back tomorrow." Relief washed over her face. But in that moment, I knew she sensed something else too. She knew the balance had shifted. I was no longer the child begging for their attention. I wasn't the one waiting by the door anymore. I had become someone who could walk away without fear, someone who could choose when to return. When I stepped outside, the morning sun was just beginning to rise. Rays spilled over the parking lot, warming the cool air. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the sunlight settle on my skin. It felt like the first warm morning after a long winter. As I walked toward the bus stop, I realized something profound. My entire childhood had been shaped by the fear of being alone. But now, walking through the quiet morning, backpack slung over my shoulder, my steps steady, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. Not of loneliness, not of needing help, not of acknowledging the hurt, not of healing from it. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, and felt something inside me finally loosen. Over the next few weeks, my life changed in small, quiet ways. My father slowly recovered. Each day, he looked at me a little longer, spoke a little softer, tried a little harder. It wasn't perfect. Change rarely is. Sometimes he reverted back to old patterns. Sometimes he didn't know what to say or how to say it. But he tried. And sometimes, trying is a bigger apology than the words themselves. My mother, too, began noticing things she had overlooked, asking me how my day was, listening fully instead of half-heartedly humming through conversations, apologizing when she snapped, giving me space when I needed it. She started telling me stories from her own childhood, stories of pressure, loneliness, emotional exhaustion. For the first time, I understood that they too had been shaped by people who didn't know how to love properly. Cycles repeat until someone refuses to let them. I had refused, but there was something else I needed to do. Something for myself. A week after my father returned home, I visited old Mr. Rahim. His driveway was free of snow this time, clean and dry. He was sitting on a plastic chair near his door, sipping tea, wrapped in a sweater that looked older than me. When he saw me, his eyes brightened. "Ah, look at you. You've grown into a man." I smiled genuinely. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" he asked, sipping his tea. "For being there that day," I said. "You didn't have to, but you did." He chuckled softly. "Son, kindness is a choice, and children deserve kindness more than anyone." I sat with him for an hour, drinking tea, talking about life, work, memories. It was peaceful, healing even. On my way home, I realized that sometimes the universe places small lanterns in your path, tiny moments of kindness to guide you through the dark. His act had been one of mine. Life went on. I continued working at the repair shop. I saved money. I started talking to people more, letting myself form friendships instead of maintaining silent distances. I let myself laugh without feeling guilty. I let myself ask for help without feeling ashamed. I let myself cry at night when old memories pressed too hard. And for the first time, the tears didn't taste like weakness. I didn't stop being strong. I just stopped confusing silence with strength. Months passed, seasons shifted, and I realized something beautiful. Healing doesn't erase the past. It simply makes room for the future. One evening, I sat in my small apartment, lights dim, a warm cup of tea in my hands. I looked around at the quiet space I had created, the peace I had built with my own hands. And I felt proud, not because of any achievement, but because I had survived myself. I had survived the small, invisible wounds that childhood left behind. I had survived the weight of expectations and the silence of neglect. I thought of the 12-year-old boy still standing on that cold sidewalk in my memory. All I wanted was to go back and tell him, "You will be okay. You will grow. You will heal. You will learn softness even if you were never given it. You will build a life where you are not afraid of needing people. You will learn that manning up doesn't mean walking alone. It means facing yourself honestly. You will find your own way, but not because they pushed you, because you choose to. And one day, when the past comes knocking, you will open the door, not with fear, not with anger, but with understanding. That's what it means to become whole. Even now, years later, whenever I walk outside on a cold morning, I remember that day. I remember the sting of the air, the numbness in my fingers, the ache in my chest. But the memory no longer hurts. It simply reminds me of how far I've come. Pain becomes wisdom. Loneliness becomes strength. Silence becomes clarity. Wounds become lessons. And broken children do not stay broken forever. I didn't. I grew, not because of them, but in spite of them, and eventually beyond them. One day, as I stood in front of the mirror getting ready for work, I caught my own reflection staring back at me. Older, stronger, softer, human. The kind of man I had taught myself to become. A man who knows the difference between independence and isolation. A man who knows that asking for help isn't weakness. A man who promises himself he will never tell a child to man up when they're simply asking to be held. And for the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself. Not for something I had achieved, but for who I had become. Because healing, I realized, is the quietest kind of courage. You don't always notice it happening, but one day you look back and see how far you've climbed. And the view is breathtaking. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who grew up feeling alone. Let these words reach someone who needs to know they're stronger than their past. Your support helps stories like this find the people who need healing the most. Thank you for watching.